the architectural collection, where this year we organized 2 symposiums with the support of the German-Czech Future Fund. One was on Bauhaus and functionalism, and the other was on women and emancipation. We had Professor Mary Paczynski. We invited her, and she gave a great presentation and provided great support. What was important for this Bauhaus Festival was to take and focus on the territory that is Eastern Europe. And I would like to quote Milan Kundera of the essay, The Tragedy of Central Europe. And let me quote, I wrote it into the manifesto here in English. So we now have this new historical situation, 30 years after the fall of the wall. And I think that there are no geographies west and east anymore. They existed for 40 years, but now for 30 years we have seen and had a European dimension that was strengthened by the accession of Central and Eastern European countries into the EU in 2004. So it was important for us to consider the new territorial dimension. And this was one of the reasons why we organized this festival. And the networks that existed between the World War, there existed very intensive networks, Bauhaus, etc. And we wanted to also shed some light on those and link ourselves to those. And we wanted to also invite curators and young experts from these countries to have a discussion with German colleagues. We wanted to link people and topics. And we wanted to make sure that everybody gets to know each other. So again, thank you so much to the Goethe Institute, to the German-Czech Future Fund, and to the the Federal Agency for Civic Education. They all facilitated this exchange. And now I have the honor to introduce our guests here tonight, our panelists. They will speak about constitution and building culture. So first of all, we have Christine Edmeyer, the president of the Chamber of Architects. Brief CV, she studied in Berlin at the UDK. She studied here, and since 1992 she has been running her own architectural and urban planning office here in Berlin. So you are sort of a pioneer that fits perfectly into this pattern. Since 1992 until 97, she had different jobs at TU Berlin, at the Arts College in Weißensee, and since 2009 she has been the vice president, and since 2013 she has been the president of the Chamber of Architects in Berlin. So a cordial welcome to you. And then Ms. Petra Ernstberger. I think I briefly met you in Leipzig at the book fair, and I think we briefly discussed our agenda. Currently, you are the managing director of the German-Czech Future Fund. Since 1990, you have been a member of the Social Democratic Party in Germany, and from 1992 until 2005, you were chairwoman of the SPD sub-district Hochwohnsiedel. I think that is in Bavaria, very difficult for me to pronounce. From 1994 until 2017, you were a member of the German Parliament for the SPD, for the Social Democratic Party. And since November 2004, you were parliamentary managing director of the SPD parliamentary group. And for 12 years, you chaired the German-Czech parliamentarian group in the German parliament. Oh, 20 years. Okay, sorry for that. And now you are the managing director of the German Czech Future Fund. And then we have Mr. Bernd Hunger. Director of the Competence Center for Large Settlements. He is an urban planner and a city sociologist and lives in Berlin. He studied in Weimar at the only school of architecture in the former GDR. This is where you studied, okay, correct. It was not the only one, okay, but the most important one, because there was no technical university in the GDR, was there? No, it didn't exist. In Weimar, the most significant university existed, okay, and in Weißensee, all right. Since 1987 until 1990, Bernd Hunger chaired the department at the Institute of Urban Planning at the Construction Academy of the GDR. From 91 until 2007, he was the chair and owner of the City Office Hunger, City Research and Urban Development, and since 1999 he has been the spokesperson for urban planning, research and development with the GDW, that is the Association of German Housing Companies. So in other words, Mr. Hunger deals mostly with big settlements and with city sociology and urban planning. And last but not least, we would like to welcome a very important guest, Mr. Rainer Nagel. He is the chair of the Federal Foundation for Building Culture. After studying architecture in Hanover and after working in Hamburg, he had different functions at district and senate levels in Hamburg. And since 1998, he worked as a managing director of Hafen City Hamburg. From 2005 on, he was the chair in the urban department in Berlin. He was in charge of urban planning and the planning of free spaces. Rainer Nagel is a member of the German Academy for City Planning and Regional Planning, and also a member of the Association of German Architects. He is also a member in the board of National Urban Development and the EBA Expert Advisory Council. Since 2009, he has been teaching, amongst others, at the Technical University of Berlin. Welcome. The Federal Foundation of Building Culture, did you say that? Yeah, I said this in the very beginning. It was so many things, sorry. All right. That is all really fantastic. So I have to make one more important remark. Because of the EU GDRP, we are pointing out that we are going to audio record and videotape this event here tonight. If you don't want to be in pictures, if you don't want to be filmed, please raise your hands. And then we will give you a paper bag. So you can hide behind a paper bag then. You will be pixelated, in other words. Okay, obviously everybody has given their consent. Thank you very much for that. But it's important to mention privacy issues. Could be that somebody doesn't want this. By the way, this also applies to the panelists. So you are also giving your consent. Thank you very much. We had this already. Afterwards, somebody said, I want to be cut out, but he was sitting right in the middle of the panel. That was an issue. So we had to organize a split screen projection, which was a big problem. I'm not kidding. Okay, now let me start again. Let us introduce the topic and let me quote on what we said. Constitution, Democracy and Building Culture is the title of our event. Constitution 2, because we had Constitution 1, and Constitution 1 happened in Ostrava in May. In May, we also wanted to organize the second event, so we had this ping pong. We wanted to organize it here in Berlin, but for personal reasons, it didn't work out. But it would have been the 17th anniversary of the German Basic Law, which would have been a great date. I don't know what happened on the 26th of November, probably also many, many historical events. But it is not enough to celebrate an anniversary. So 100 years of Bauhaus is what we are celebrating. And we are looking at the last 100 years, what else happened 100 years ago, 100 years of Weimar Constitution. We are not going to tell you any theoretical things. We had it in Ostrava. 100 years, century full of questions. The Weimar Constitution was the title. We had a former presidential candidate of Slovakia and a constitutional judge, a co-founder of the Czech Constitution there at this event. No, tonight we would like to focus on democracy and building culture. And, 100 years of Bauhaus, 100 years of Weimar Constitution, 100 years of the development of modernity and democracy in Europe, on the challenges regarding building culture. 2019 marks the 100th anniversary of the Weimar Constitution, and therefore in 2019, we have various anniversaries that are being celebrated in Europe. The foundation of the Slovak Republic, for instance, and societal emancipation in Europe developed a development of modernity, which at the time encompassed modern constitution and facilitated different building cultures. 100 years later, central issues on housing, city, public spaces, or gender equality are still hotly debated. And the constitution at the time, and we discussed this also at the conference of the Competence Center, where Mr. Nagel and Ms. Talgott, who apologizes, she couldn't come today. There was a confusion regards the dates. And paragraph 155 of the Weimar Constitution was illustrated at this conference. So this is like a comment on a past time. Today, democracy is questioned by radical right-wing parties. The democratic guiding principles and architecture of modernity created identification with a socially just society and built environment. In contrast, we are now asking ourselves, what meaning and significance does building culture have and should have at the end of the day with regards to a political and democratic responsibility of building culture? We recently discussed this in the context of the architectural dispute, but this should not just result in a debate on right rooms or right-wing spaces. No, it is a controversy on aesthetics. It's about a holistic discourse. It is about the political position of building culture of foundations of countries in Middle Europe, the Weimar Constitution and the civilizatory decline that we saw here in Germany with Nazi Germany. And then we had the post-war period, including the debates in the East and the West. We also had the Bauhaus debate. And we see implications until today for a modern, emancipated and democratic society. So, that was the initial hypotheses. And to my right, I would now like to start. The chairman of the Federal Foundation for Building Culture. What political position does building culture have for democracy? I think it has a great value.
When you walk around, you will notice that it is not determined by aesthetics or by the culture of building, but we will soon reach also considerations of sociology and also constitutional theory and also the freedom to assemble. You hear the tractors humming around, so it's not just aesthetics and historical buildings. I think the concept of democratic space is extremely important. In other words, without a sufficient offering in terms of building, no democracy can thrive. Coming back to the anniversary of the Bauhaus, we have this final event, Bauhaus Reuse or Reuse Bauhaus, Bauhaus Reuse. It's almost the conclusive event of the Bauhaus anniversary. 100 years of Bauhaus. I don't know what's your judgment on this 100 years. Who believes it's a smash hit, a full success? Nobody showing up, one positive vote. So when the urban planning, who thinks that the year of cultural heritage in Europe, it was a full success. To my surprise, only 4 people showed up. So these anniversaries pass by and you get over them. The Bauhaus anniversary started out rather slowly, because at the very beginning people started saying so much Bauhaus. We organized 5 events, among other things, with the with the trades and crafts. We also erected a sculpture as a first movement. We thought it was a highly relevant topic. On the other hand, on this occasion, the 100 years of Weimar Constitution was short-thrifted, but in reality Bauhaus would never have been established if not probably at the same time, around the same time, the Weimar Constitution had not been adopted. They wouldn't have the grounds and the organizational structures. This feeling of a new start wouldn't have been there. It was fully supported by politics, especially the left-wing currents, but also the social democrats. It was rather viewed with a critical eye by the conservative and right-wing circles. So without this support, the Bauhaus would not have thrived. What's true to the present day, the building culture, we hope that they provide us with the solution of social question, like in 1919, it's the topic of housing, as a true shortage of housing. And the Social Democrats hope to resolve the question of housing from the Bauhaus, which provided also the main support. It was not so much art or handicraft or trades, but when the Bauhaus started out in 1927 for earnest with modern social building, then there was a big upswing. It was not the Bauhaus people, but their fans and their network started building in Frankfurt, in Stuttgart, in Darmstadt. Huge residential neighborhoods, settlements that became a role model, and the Bauhaus made itself felt. The reduction of price-worthy building. We have analogies. We do not have anything like a Bauhaus, but we have intermittent status. Nessie Edmeyer, Berlin is preparing for the next IBA. So the exceptional period, intermittent exceptional phase, would probably be also a reflection of the Bauhaus atmosphere. Again, considerations are being undertaken how one can build at a low cost with cheap building materials, for example wood, and also for the sake of climate protection. Well, we must admit that these supposedly cheap building materials are much more expensive than the traditional building materials. The same was true for the older Bauhaus, so the new building techniques turned out to be more expensive than the traditional or the standard building practice. And Gropius lost any mood to continue on that road. So we have so many analogies. It's extremely political. The dilemma today, like back then, we know 100 years afterwards we knew what we had got with the Bauhaus. Today, again, politics does not perceive the opportunities in building culture. So many different issues are taken as a triggering moment to legitimize oneself, immigration, climate issues, and a maximum limit on the rents. So it's much ado about nothing, but the opportunities that rest within the building sector are hardly ever seen. So we need to take this responsibility, taking the politician. Why don't you take advantage of us and of the enormous potential that rests in building and in building culture? You have also holistic view. Holistic, well, even more than what we call holistic or sustainable, not only ecological and economical, but also a spatial impact, creating on also in a procedural way, because Bauhaus was also a procedural experiment in a cultural sense. Before following up on this political sphere, a quick follow-up question. There were so many starting points for every of our guests. The question of housing. The Bauhaus could not really have a home run. And what I heard from you when it was about the settlements of the post-war modernity and also those settlements before modernity, building culture needs support from the politicians and it needs to be seen in a holistic way. I think this is also close to your heart, Mr. Schruoffenegger. Such a municipal approach in order not to compartmentalize urban planning and urban building, and also your topic, Miss Ernstberger, Chamber of Architects. So much Bauhaus. It's not so much Bauhaus. On the contrary, in the Czech Republic we have so much of functionalism. Nonetheless, the functionalism was short-drifted. That's also a reason why you supported this Czech perspective. What can you tell us about your feelings when you have this perspective on Germany from the Czech Republic, seeing the Bauhaus in context? Well, of course, we must say there must certain political conditions were necessary to have such a thriving building culture, not only the Bauhaus label, but throughout Central Europe. It was a major foundation for the dynamics and identification with modernity. What's your judgment, seeing this from a frequent traveler between Germany and the Czech Republic? What's your view on this anniversary? What's your view on this series of events that has not been appreciated enough in the making of the modern states in Central and Eastern Europe? Well, as was stated before, well, there were certain conditions under which the Bauhaus could come into being in the first place. The Weimar Constitution is a part of it, but also the right to vote for the women, but also the development in social housing. Social housing was taken as a major task. Something had to be done for the workers. That was an environment in which the Bauhaus could create open spaces to think it through thoroughly, to experiment, and also open spaces for dispute. That's something that I want to see again. So many things that were triggered by the Bauhaus have not been completed to the present day. We have not reached a status that was really envisaged back then. Looking at the equality of genders, well, we still have not reached the stage where women have the same income as men, both in Czech Republic and in Germany. Nor have we reached the same ranking of women in top leading positions, let alone the universities, where we have still a male dominance. The same is true, for example, what is the buzzword? Well, we have the chaos in housing, because politics in certain periods, especially in social housing, has cut down, and the social situation in Germany has improved very much, so we do not need any longer social housing, but look into the major cities. The rents have been pushed up to such a degree that ordinary people can no longer afford the rent, and couples have to work both to afford a decent living space in Munich and in Prague. We have exponential growth of rents. Then you have institutions like Airbnb that are aiming only at profit and that just trade off these apartments. I don't see any major counteraction in Prague that they would be limited. So the Airbnb and campuses like this. So the lack of housing is not tackled. We have also differences in the development of rural areas and the cities. I come from a rural environment. I'm not a city dweller. Up to some years ago, you could buy a house for just €1. They were thrown after any interested people. Certain structures, such as small villages, are depopulated. So the inner cities of the smaller cities are bleeding out down to the last pub. So they are undergoing a process of depopulation. A new culture of building needs to rethink these developments in practical terms. An example, in my region, together with a female friend, I wanted to set up a community apartment. We were looking for an apartment, but you cannot live in such a living community like with parents and children. You need your own retreats. So the whole object must be bigger. You need to have the rooms. There must be a different layout. No chance. What about? Well, of course, yeah. Now finally we ended up building a house and we refurbished and renovated it from scratch. It's 120 years old, but not everybody can afford this. So it's a structure that probably will also be desired by the elderly more often than in the past. They want to live in communities. While the other are our patchwork families. Again, for these patchwork families, we do not have suitable living spaces or apartments where it is possible to live together as a patchwork family. So I think these are things that politics, well, I have been in politics for 22 years. Politics did not have it on the screen. Well, with a rent stop or rent limit, an attempt has been made, but it does not work perfectly. We need so much free space to consider all the future designs of our living situation, to discuss it, and also to have a dispute, because dispute was also something that was exercised by the Bauhaus.
Well, yeah, there was some political explosive power. I agree. So we had Mr. Bodenschatz here, and he said that there is a printed matter of the German parliament on the Bauhaus here, and he said, yes, there it was about the Bauhaus of the export champions. This is an export product of Germany, and it should circulate the world. We read this. And I think he is totally right, what we basically critically said. I would like to pass the question to Ms. Edmeyer. So these were building political issues that we have discussed so far, but in the Bauhaus year, like this anniversary year that Mr. Nagel sketched, like the typical anniversary pattern, did we bark up the wrong tree? Would it have been an occasion to raise political issues and to connect it to the debate regarding Weimar and housing? These are fundamental and political issues. And it was sent out to the rest of the world, but maybe we forgot to focus on what is happening here and also in Central and Eastern European countries after the First World War. So why are we still confronted with all these issues and challenges? Are we too unpolitical? Did we miss discussions? Did we forget to have the right discussions? We invited actually a lawyer here, somebody specializing in constitutional law, but nobody had time. Do we need paragraph 155 again? Yeah, I printed it out here, but what I prepared, I definitely have to share with you. I'm sorry for that. So, but let me come back to your question. The Bauhaus year is not over yet. It was probably not a super success. Nobody would say it was 100% success, but the question is, how do you measure this? And amongst experts, there was not a lot of new things produced. My generation learned everything already during our studies. Not much new was produced. Maybe there was a more differentiated focus on women and Bauhaus. That was very important, although these were kitschy films or kitsch films, but the population and the viewers thought that these were a very interesting contribution to the debate. And then we have these 3 Bauhaus phases. In fact, it's actually 2. They were considered very carefully, and the Weimar Bauhaus phase did not really contribute much to housing. It only started in 1925. And in this context, if you, of course, consider current housing issues and problems, and then believe that Bauhaus will provide you with the respective answers, then you might be disappointed. Firstly, the Bauhaus did not really focus a lot on housing as such. Secondly, answers that were found and given at the time might not be topical anymore. We have to be very honest here. So this whole mood of changing things, of starting, and now I would like to quote somebody, because between the Weimar Constitution and the Basic Law, there are many similarities, especially when it comes to ownership, expropriation issues. So we do see some similarities, yes, yet there's one big difference. In Article 155 of the Weimar Constitution, it says that housing needs have to be fulfilled by the state. And every German is entitled to a healthy housing, and families who have multiple kids should be provided with reasonable home. And this is what the Weimar Constitution actually says. It doesn't only say that ownership obliges, but that the processing and utilization of soil is an obligation. So the increase in the value of soil, which incurs over time, has to be made available to the public. I mean, not everything was put into practice to 100%, but at least the Constitution stipulated this. And this is a big difference to the Basic Law. The German Basic Law just says that housing or the flat should be inviolable. So in other words, you should be left alone in your home. It's also said in the Weimar Constitution, yeah, it's also said there, but the Basic Law is very limited, and it's just this one sentence on housing in the Basic Law. Housing during the Weimar Republic, which is not necessarily identical with Bauhaus. Of course, there are connections and links, but this is why I actually like the title here today, because 100 years of Weimar Constitution in the context of housing is at least as important as the Bauhaus itself. And maybe we really neglected this topic, especially in the context of the expropriation debate that we have and see here in Berlin in particular, but we might also see it at a national level very soon. And we do not have to install socialism again or sketch the scenario of or the threat scenario of socialism. No, the German law or constitution also stipulates for expropriation. The question is, when is it appropriate? And I'm sure there will be some hot debates on this. What is your opinion on this? When is it appropriate? Well, it depends on the individual case, of course. I would say as long as we have phenomena like Airbnb and many other organizations that can be actually handled with the respective laws, I don't think that we have enough tools and means at hand. I think we need to do more in order to come up with an appropriate housing policy. Well, we also have to see that during the Weimar Republic, that is after this First World War, housing issues were much bigger than today. Consequently, new buildings during the Weimar Republic satisfied a certain deficit, first and foremost. Yet it is fascinating to see how they talked about new buildings for the new human being, for the new woman, for new Frankfurt. Everything was new at the time. So they sort of pressed the reset button, and they didn't want anything to look like in the past. And this is the aesthetics component that should not be over-evaluated, because it was first and foremost a social engineering approach. So the architect was a social engineer. It was unfortunately only males at the time, but they were considered to be a social engineer that has the respective know-how in order to quickly and appropriately provide enough housing for people. Not social housing, mind you, that is a very important difference. It was not just about workers, it was about the public, it was about everybody. Everybody was looking for flats and homes, and housing was geared to basically everybody's needs. A lot of research has been done on what educational approaches they pursued at the time. So the image that architects and also policy makers had of how people are supposed to live was clearly determined and clearly answered. There were not many opportunities for people to develop. It was first and foremost about a hygienic, functional home. And a very brief detour on the topic of women. Yeah, really very brief. The famous Frankfurt kitchen did not serve the purpose of women being able to work. No, the purpose was to optimize certain routines so that women, mothers, wives would have more time for their kids and in order to take care of themselves. So that was the purpose of the Frankfurt kitchen, and it was not women's emancipation in the sense of that she would then have time to also work. So it was more about efficiently design household activities of women, yes. Now, we are focusing on the topic of housing, but there are also other topics that need to be discussed in the context of urban planning and architecture. There are also other important aspects of building culture that are linked to the freedoms and the constitutional rights of citizens. But as we are talking about housing now, and Bernd Hunger just said that he also would like to say something now, you as a housing and living expert. Now, if we had paragraph 155, for instance, also in our basic law today, or let me put it differently, why don't we have such a paragraph in our basic law? Why didn't we copy it? And if we had such a paragraph, would our debate then be different regarding expropriation, regarding commons, regarding participation in these aspects? Participation regarding soil prices and the negative consequences like speculation, etc.